All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be joining you today. It is a Thursday, and also I'm delighted to have my friend and ally Chuck Pinocchio from One Pair States. Hey, Chuck, how you doing today?
I'm fine, Hal. How about you, brother?
I'm doing really well, and I saw you on video. You're making the rounds. I saw you on Egberto Willies. He's got a pretty big podcast. Now you're doing well, you're on PDA a lot. You're fighting the good fight. How you doing? Before we get into that fight for single-payer health care in this country, how's the holiday season looking for you, Chuck?
Oh gosh, it's a mix of emotions. Staying connected with family, not traveling much, although I'm up in Philadelphia right now. But radically hopeful. Trying to make those connections, build out strategy, connect ourselves with other allies. Wake up the Democratic Party and look for opportunities with the Republican Party.
Yeah, I was really impressed with your willingness to at least consider that under the Trump administration there can be progress made. There could be progress made. We'll see. But the Democrats have not been anywhere near the champs we were hoping on this issue. Maybe the Republicans will surprise us in the direction that they generally don't, which is working for the people. We're going to get into all of that with Chuck Pinocchio. OnePayerStates.org, by the way, is his website. And it's the group. It's the organization's website. Chuck is the president of that organization and founder. I always get the titles wrong. I didn't put it on, but is that you are president, right? Or you're leader, founder, one of the co-founders? Do you have how do you like to call yourself on this?
Well, my title is president, but I certainly am co-founder and persist as the one of the original co-founders, the only one active, keeping this fight going for 15 years now.
Yeah, I mean, your website's very impressive. So when you say keeping it going, it looks like it's not just keeping it going. I mean, you're actually progressing, which is tremendous. And it's not something that's in any way easy to do. Again, Chuck Pinocchio, One Payer States. We're going to talk about healthcare mainly with Chuck. But as you know from being on my program before, I have been really leading consistently with the tragedy in Gaza, the American complicity in the genocide there. This is from the Turkish news service Anadolu Ajansi. Over 45,100 identified killed by Israel in over a year now. They describe it, I think, accurately, certainly in my opinion. I know it's tendentious, Chuck, but the genocidal war by Israel continues. And there's just nothing in the least bit remotely good about this or about what it's doing, I think, to the nation or the world. Just real quick, giving some more numbers out. 32 dead in the past 24 hours as of midnight. And we mentioned the toll over 45,000 at this point. Before we get into healthcare, I just have a question. And I always deal with this, Chuck. Given the moral, I guess, weight of this particular ongoing crime, are we indulging ourselves by talking about other topics, no matter how important they may be, like Medicare for all? I mean, do we have some kind of a moral duty? And this is something I struggle with. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just wondering, are there certain, I don't know what the right word is, dynamic, certain experiences that are so serious that they kind of have to take precedence over everything else?
So, I mean, you know my background. I've been doing this work since I was really 13. I just recently turned 65. So I've been in this world of politics for 52 years, and I've worked in any number of issue areas. But they're all related. In my mind, they're all intersectional, right? So that the work at One Payer States, our vision is healthcare and health justice for all. And health implies everything else, including questions of war and peace. Unless we have a society that is committed to peaceful resolution and progress, our work is not done, not by a long shot. We need to be thinking completely in terms of universal transformational justice for all. And that includes, of course, conditions of peace around the world, bottom up, small d democracy. And, right now, 2/3 of the world is leaning into authoritarianism. 2/3 of the countries around the world. That was a third 10 years ago. 1/3 of the world. We've gone from 1/3 to 2/3, doubled the number of authoritarian countries. And what that means, too, is that these create conditions of chaos, war, civil war, and the billionaire class, they're just laughing all the way to the bank. They're just manipulating all of the weaknesses in our political system to advance their own agenda, their own power, their own wealth accumulation. And that wraps around all of our institutions, right? Housing, environment, climate, education, policing, and again, war and peace. All these issues have got to be thought of on equal plane. And I believe that we need to be in the fight for justice on all of them and not be single issue.
Do you think, and I really love that answer, and it's I think, it's from my perspective, spot on. But you expressed it more clearly, more concisely, I think more powerfully than I could. Chuck, do you think that each of these issues where we push for what we would call justice, environmental justice, social justice, we push for life, you said intersectional. So if we can get universal health care in this country, do you believe that makes it less likely that we will project American military power abroad?
Absolutely. The frame that I used years ago, but I'd like to bring it back, is to think in terms of civilized healthcare for all, because that's really what we're talking about when we create a universal single-payer Medicare for all, whatever the terminology we want to use, so long as it's cradle to grave, comprehensive, accessible, and completely affordable and tax-based, publicly funded, and mostly privately delivered. We don't have objections to the private delivery of healthcare, but it's the insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the medical manufacturers of and also the big hospitals. These are the four major components. So long as they continue doing their work, which is just extracting wealth out of our society, we're not going to be able to get to justice on all the other issues. So there's an absolute relationship between these. And some people call the other issues social determinants of health, housing and food and education and environment and so forth. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question even further, I think we've got to be very intentional in how we connect what I call our people, our politics, and our policies. They all have to work together, and we all have to recognize the validity of everybody's choices, where they emphasize their work. If people don't have housing, they can't do anything else, right? If they don't have a roof over their head, what else are they capable of doing until they get that roof over their head?
Chuck Pinocchio with us from onepayerstates.org as we head hard into the holiday season, 1 week until Christmas, and then, of course, New Year's to follow. You can see the slide there I took from your website, Chuck, onepayerstates.org. The link is on the screen, and you can sign their state-based Universal Health Care Act support petition. That's a mouthful. The link is in the show description as well. Also, click like, click subscribe. We certainly do appreciate that. And you kind of mentioned, well, actually, before we get into your optimism, and you said you are optimistic, you mentioned something, Chuck, and I have this from your website. I wanted you to get into it. You talked about private delivery as opposed to, and I think that's, contrasted with, say, the National Health Service in the UK, where all the medical care providers are employees of the government. You talk about a different model. Can you explain why? Why do you think it's better to have doctors, hospitals, nurses working either for themselves or for perhaps a non-profit company versus what we have now? Or versus both what we have now and versus a national health service?
Right. So it's really, as I profess in my own work, as an academic, as an organizer, is I'm quite agnostic about this. And that is to say that, we do, for the time being, live in a capitalist country, and it needs to be heavily, heavily regulated. Take a look at Germany, for example, where they have actually a private insurance component. It's relatively small, but it's heavily regulated. And so, in our society, most people really, really value the ability to make their own choices. And I don't see any reason why we couldn't do that if we had, let's just say, an NHS type system. But the idea of an all public system, I don't think that our politics has an appetite for that just yet. I think that that's a possibility down the road. But what I can see is viable, and this means winning Republicans. We've got to get Republicans on board with this effort to enable states. I hope I'm not getting too far ahead of you right now, but to enable our state campaigns to model healthcare systems. So our system actually, our aspiration to create the system is very closely akin to Canada. But Canada still has work to do. They don't have a completely comprehensive system. So I want to work at the issues that are going to address the systemic cost drivers in healthcare that will allow and enable both the patient to be put first in the decision-making process. The profit issue has got to be taken out of the equation 100%. So when I say private delivery, I'm not talking about gouging people or continuing down this path where people are being scammed. The whole policy, or the pharmaceutical benefits manager problem, the PBM manager problem in the pharmaceutical industry, where they're scamming money on both sides. Wall Street profits dictate largely the healthcare outcomes in this country, not the condition of the patients, but the profits on Wall Street. That's got to end. No question about it. So when I say private delivery, I'm talking about delivery through independent doctors and smaller hospitals, not these massive hospital chains, but something that comports with how Americans generally like to see things, sort of a hybrid of the public and private sectors. And at some point we may move down the road all the way toward public, an NHS type system, but I don't think we have that appetite, and we're not going to get Republican support, frankly.
Well, and let me just jump in real quick. I personally find the Canadian model extremely appealing. To me, for what, I'm just giving my own take. And I understand Canada does not have the most efficient system. Their costs are actually second highest, as I understand it, in the developed world. Of course, far below ours, far
right.
Closer to the UK, Japan, France, Germany, other countries with universal systems. But still, they're less efficient than those countries. So the private delivery model is not necessarily, nothing's going to be perfect. But to my way of thinking, frankly, Chuck, I like the idea of some competition in the healthcare sector. In other words, I can decide I want to go to Dr. Jones or Dr. Smith. Who do I like better? Right. I won't have to pay either one directly out of pocket. Yes, my taxes will go up, but my take-home wages will go up more. So in the end, I'll still be better off. But I really like the idea that I'm not just going to a bureaucracy, even if it's a bureaucracy that I voted for and then I have some real oversight over. But still, I'm just saying personally, that's just my take, because I don't consider myself a socialist. So you're kind of talking to me. I think a lot of people feel the same way.
Yeah, I appreciate that as well. I tend to identify myself as a social democrat, which means that in my mind, my approach, my methodology is to borrow ideas across the political spectrum that gets us to a solution that will win us 218 votes in the House, that'll win us 51 votes in the U.S. Senate ultimately, and get the president to sign it. We can do this. There's no question about it, except for the problem, of course, with Citizens United and the way that our entire political system has been hijacked by profiteers and the wealthy on Wall Street and Silicon Valley and other financial centers.
Well, you mentioned profits a couple of times. You just brought it up again. Did you want to talk a little bit? I don't have a slide of it, but you mentioned this in our prep. The op-ed by Wendell Potter, one of the heroes of the single-payer movement that was just in the New York Times.
Right, right. And Wendell's a dear friend. He's up here in Philadelphia. We get together just for conversation around strategy, how we can move forward. Yeah, Wendell had a crisis of conscience back in 2005 when his industry was pushing harder for basically scamming people more money, raising their co-pays and deductibles. It's about profit first, profit over patience. That's why I reference and refer to the industry as profit first, not for profit, but profit first. And I say profit first because they bake in their profits before a single healthcare service is paid for. That's their business model. That is their business model. And it's not illegal. They're actually doing fiduciary responsibility to their stockholders, which is improving their profits. But you can't have a healthcare system that is profit driven the way that this one is, because it fundamentally and systematically and definitionally will deny people the care that they need when they need it. And as a result, we have more than 60,000 people die unnecessarily in this country every year because they can't get the health care they need when they need it. In addition, close to 60% of all personal bankruptcies are related to healthcare costs that drive people into bankruptcy. That's unheard of in the industrial world outside the United States. This is appalling that the money class, the billionaire class primarily that's driving this, has completely hijacked not only this industry. That's why we need to make an important connection between all of our industries here. But the sports industrial complex, the agricultural industrial complex, the prison to pipeline, the prison industrial complex. All of these systems are related. They're all about wealth extraction. And until we reverse that, and that means overturning Citizens United, that means getting back a rightful understanding of what the First Amendment is. It's not about money, and it's not about speech for corporations or corporate personhood. It's about people, getting back to people. So that's why I center my fight on healthcare, but bring in the conversation with every other social justice group that we all need to see ourselves as interrelated and working together in order to create the large mass movement we're going to need to defeat this the billionaire class.
Chuck, are you surprised that the Affordable Care Act didn't make a more positive change in our delivery system? Yes, there are more people covered, but it doesn't appear, despite some touting early on, to have bent the cost curve down. And the crisis, as I understand it, in terms of the number of bankruptcies, the description of people, basically death panels, insurance company death panels, making decisions to let folks die, that problem has not been even seems to have been not even been addressed. Are you surprised by that?
No, and that's because the industry was in the room when the negotiations were determining what exactly the Affordable Care Act would do and wouldn't do. There were certain things they didn't win on. Pre-existing conditions is probably the most popular component of the Affordable Care Act, which is to say that people cannot be denied insurance because they have a pre-existing condition, a condition where they've got a heart issue and they're being denied health care because they're considered too risky for an industry that makes a determination on the risk bearing of the individual applicant, for their insurance. So the Affordable Care Act did us right by that, but it didn't deal with the basic cost drivers in healthcare. And we know this for a fact because after the Affordable Care Act passed, profits in the medical industry, again, pharmaceutical, big hospitals, medical device, and insurance, their profits all went up well over 300% within the span of a year. So, in order to get the Affordable Care Act to have passed narrowly back in 2010, it took a lot of negotiation with those industries to make sure that they weren't going to be fighting the passage of this legislation. Since that time, of course, the Republicans have tried to repeal it 50 times, but I think they may have given up on that. And the legislation that we're carrying with Representative Khanna and Representative Markey is an amendment to the Affordable Care Act. It's called Section 1334, that would allow states to move forward with the federal healthcare dollars and the legal waivers necessary to create robust universal systems modeled at the state level.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great idea. I love this concept because the states are supposed to be the laboratories of democracy. Also, there's an argument, and I've heard this from some self-styled progressives, that you can't do it on a state level. No one's figured it out. It's too challenging, which is kind of absurd because there are many countries around the world that are smaller in population than many states, Israel being a good example, that have very effectively implemented universal health care and saving their people money. Here's the bill from 23, the House bill you mentioned, 6270. And you discussed this in the podcast on PDA with Progressive Democrats of America. You said this is going to change, though, right? That number will be revised.
Right. It'll have to be reintroduced in the new Congress. And our goal actually is to get the bill in the House and the Senate, right? Ro Khanna in the House and Senator Ed Markey in the Senate. Actually, our goal is to have them co-introduce with a Republican, this legislation. That's our goal. That's what I'm working toward very hard. And then get that introduced early in the session so we can get right to work and really get the attention of the Trump administration. There are too many, I would call them partisan Democrats or, Trump haters, whatever you want to call them, who would rather go without getting a healthcare solution here than working with Trump and the Trump administration. And I think that's faulty. Yeah, I recognize the fascist tenets of this administration coming into power. You can't ignore, Project 2025 and not understand that this is fundamentally fascism that we're talking about, white supremacy, white nationalism, and state corporatism as the three cornerstones. But having said that, we still have to look at opportunities for change. I would go back and take a look at Otto von Bismarck, who was the prime minister of Germany back in the early days of the German nation. He helped to introduce universal health care, a conservative, far right of center political leader in Germany. And he did so primarily because he wanted to undercut organized labor, get them health care, and that would sort of slow down the momentum. That was his purpose. But that's how Germany actually got to universal health care. And then in terms of the states, for people who say we can't get it done at the state level, that's so disingenuous because that actually describes the history of the progressive era where states were modeling, Wisconsin specifically, the national solutions by the time Teddy Roosevelt came to power. And then the New Deal, where those ideas were modeled in Albany when FDR was governor of New York. That's ignoring that reality, and also the Great Society, where the civil rights movement took root at the state level before it went national. So it's very disingenuous. It ignores the fact that our Constitution, at least in theory, is designed to separate power between the state and national systems, whereas the states are actually intended to be, as you said, laboratories of democracy and laboratories of experimentation.
Chuck, do you see the Republican Party ultimately forswearing Wall Street? The profits are so astronomical in this industry. I'll be honest with you, I don't even think I want to say cynical. I just look at the political landscape and I maybe they both agree, hey, if we unilaterally disarm, we're both equally in the same spot. But I think well, how optimistic are you about that possibility? And then do you think in some states anyway, there's much more likelihood that we'll get it done?
Okay. One word change I just want to make clear to you and your audience for myself, and that is I am hopeful, not optimistic, in the sense that optimism for me is an ideological outlook. It's rose-colored glasses. It's seeing the world as positive despite everything. And so I look at the world similar to you, I think, agnostically. I look at the world in terms of what it is, what we're dealing with. And I have a vision. And this is really the strategy conversation that is not happening. It's not happening, not with the Democratic Party. It's not happening with allies of the Democratic Party. It's not happening in almost any space in the nonprofit sector, of groups that identify as center left, progressive, social democratic, what have you. And until we have that vision of a future where we see the healthcare that everybody needs, we see the housing that everybody needs, we see the access to quality food that everybody needs, we see the addressing directly and forcefully this issue of climate emergency. Until we get there, we have to see it. We actually have to see that success and then continually stay focused on that vision as we reverse engineer and ask the questions, how did we get there? How did we get there? And it's a longer conversation, but that's really where our strategy begins. And I see these emails coming out, from Democratic Party leaders, and they say, where are we going? Where are we headed? And they're fundraising notes, they're fundraising letters. They say, oh, we have to elect more progressives, blah, blah, blah. That's only it's only a relatively small part of the equation. Elections are really the last step in rebuilding democracy. Elections are really the last step in rebuilding small d democracy. We have to bring people together. We have to educate ourselves. We have to collect our power and make sure that we're being heard and that we are in the conversation. We have a seat at the table. Someone famously said, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu.
You're on the table, right? So this guy, there he is, his mugshot, Luigi Mangione, seems to be changing or bringing to this topic to the table. It simply wasn't there, slaying a healthcare CEO. I want to just ask for you to play this clip real quick because there's some really interesting parts to it. This is from Washington Post.
Depending on your age, this person could elicit a very different response. 41% of people aged 18 to 29 say Luigi Mangione's killing of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson was acceptable. In a separate poll, the same people in that age bracket view Mangione more favorably than Thompson. On the other end of the spectrum,
I'm going to stop it right there because I heard that 41% and I thought that's too low. And maybe it's just the media I consume, but he's kind of a folk hero at this point in a lot of circles. And maybe 41% people just are loath to say, yeah, I support clearly a first-degree murderer. I mean, that's what he did. So, but still, I think in their secret hearts, maybe half or more Americans of all ages kind of, are pleased or certainly have a schadenfreude from this experience.
Right. And I think that does speak to the depths of cynicism and despair that so many Americans are feeling at this particular time, that they've lost control of their lives. They've lost control of the decisions around their own healthcare, the affordability of their own healthcare. And they recognize that these industries, especially in this case, the insurance industry, it adds nothing to the equation. They don't do healthcare. They don't do healthcare. They facilitate payment for healthcare, but they don't do healthcare. And yet, they have very cleverly marketed themselves as an essential component of the process, that we can't live without them. That they're the gatekeepers. That they're the ones who keep people from getting unnecessary healthcare. Right? And it's complete fabrication. It's cynical. It's very calculated. And, Wendell Potter revealed that in his op-ed piece in the New York Times yesterday, that the industry's broken. And I think people fundamentally get that. And so,
well, and for every dollar maybe they save from, being spent on unnecessary care, they gobble up 5 or 6 for their bloated CEO salaries, their inefficient administration, and also a lot of kickbacks and bribes going to CEOs of for-profit hospitals, all the money they spend to lobby to keep this system in place. I'm willing to say, yes, probably there are a few people, I don't want to say they abuse the system, but some people are a little bit hypochondriacal, if I said the word right, and maybe they do sometimes take some pain medications that they don't really need. But you know what? That's nothing. It's a bag of shells compared to the billions that are siphoned out of our pockets by these ghouls.
Yeah, over at pnhp.org, that's Physicians for National Health Program, they have a number of studies on the fact that it's only about 3% of the population that pursues and gets what you might call unnecessary health care. But it's a tiny percentage compared to what you were talking about, which is the waste, fraud, abuse, and excessive profit of an industry. It's about a third of every healthcare dollar. 1 out of every 3 healthcare dollars is attributable to waste, fraud, abuse, excessive bureaucracy, excessive profiteering. And here in Philadelphia, Independence Blue Cross has some 50 vice presidents, 50. And they're all paid 6 figures and above. And you have to ask yourself, why does a company need 50 vice presidents? Because they're sprinkled about all over town and they sit on all these nonprofit boards. So if there's ever a discussion about moving toward an actual solution on healthcare, they're in the room to say, no. We're not going to support your university. We're not going to support your, health, your healthcare association. AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, they're complicit in all of this. If people don't realize it, the largest organization in the country for seniors, it makes their money off of profiteering as well.
They do sell health insurance. I see their, ads and stuff in the magazines. Before we get, I want to just play the rest of this clip. You can see the headline there. This is from the Washington Post, just 20 more seconds. 41% of young people surveyed 18 to 29 said they approve of what Mangione did, and they like him a lot better. Most prefer him to the healthcare executive who was killed. You can see the caption there, young adults more likely to approve of Mangione. Let me just play the rest of this, Chuck, because it also is consistent with what you just said.
Those 65 and older view Mangione unfavorably by about 15 to 1. This can help explain why your TikTok or YouTube feed can look so different from what you're seeing on TV or in the newspaper. Full disclosure, we are a newspaper on social media. Younger people are more likely to get their news from social media, and in this particular case, younger people had a very different point of view than older people, and that's why.
All right, so that's the whole thing there. It's pretty short, but a couple of thoughts I had on that. First of all, the oldsters like you and me seem to condemn Mangione by an enormous number, 15 to 1. One thing that's very interesting about that 65 and older, not quite there yet, Chuck, is they have decent, not great, but Medicare, which is far more approved than the for-profit system that young people are contemplating perhaps for the rest of their life as Medicare disadvantage becomes more and more the rule. So part of this is that young people recognize that Mangione's action taking on a for-profit healthcare ghoul is going after somebody who's could ruin their life for its entirety. So I think that's a big part of it. I also think the media explanation by the Washington Post guy is spot on. Yeah, older people are reading the New York Times, they're reading the Washington Post, they're watching CNN, they're hearing from privileged people at a minimum, and they're hearing news that's curated by elites, by billionaire class, and that group doesn't like CEOs being killed.
Right. I mean, and just to accentuate your point there, Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, went out to Blair County where where Luigi Mangione was picked up by authorities. And he only had words of condemnation for Luigi Mangione and failed to address the underlying issue that brought him to that point. Not that it's justifiable, and I don't go down that road. I don't see this as justifiable in the sense that I really believe the only way we're going to go forward here is to create a mass movement centered on nonviolence. So, that's what I've done for my entire life. But that's the point: is we have to create a mass movement. It shouldn't actually come down to a single individual who takes matters into their own hands. But that's sort of the point that we've reached, that point of desperation. And so he does reflect the feelings. And I get that. I totally get that. I get the anger. I mean, I've had horrific experiences in the medical industry, and I just moved on to Medicare myself. So rather than paying, full fare when I went to the eye doctor yesterday, my glaucoma doctor, I paid 20%, $33. So, I mean, that saved me, several $100s actually, now that I'm on Medicare. So it does, when you're on Medicare, at least traditional Medicare, Part A and B is what I have. I don't do the supplemental, although you mentioned Medicare Advantage. 52% of seniors are now on Medicare Advantage to get that supplemental, but very few of them realize that it's a bait and switch. that you pay for this, what appears to be terrific, supplemental for prescription drugs and for other needs. But when you actually need what you need, in vast majority of the cases, you're not going to get it. Then that's the thing. It's a bait and switch by the industry.
240-242-5646 if you'd like to talk to Chuck Pinocchio from One Payer States. Again, the link is also for his website. It's on your screen. It's also in our description. And he's just a great healthcare advocate, healthcare champion. Chuck, I know one area where you and I disagreed was on the election that just concluded. We discussed this, the importance of voting for Democrats. I ask you, and I know you said you're agnostic, so this isn't something that you're going to have you're not going to recoil negatively the way other guests have, but do you see any chance, or I'll phrase it differently. Yes, I'm somewhat hopeful that maybe we can see some movement from Trump. One thing about Trump, for all his problems, for all the issues that surround him, he seems like sometimes he goes off on his own bat and he doesn't just follow what the lobbyists tell him and his funders and donors the way certainly Harris appeared to do.
Right.
But I am of the mind right now that both parties, at least the legislative branch in Congress, are corrupt, and they're simply not going to listen to the people no matter how loud we squawk. The only reason we're even talking about it now is because a sexy, glamorous killer murdered, shot somebody and brought, right in the street of downtown Manhattan, and he was videotaped doing it. And this is such a big news story that the media covers it because it means they'll make some profits. So do you think do you see an opportunity? Do you think it's necessary that we take an opportunity here to try to build an alternative party to the Republicrats?
I see no harm in doing that. I'm not going to devote, much of my energy to it right now. I'm taking this almost day by day, week by week, and just seeing how the next few weeks unfolds prior to January 20th to see if I can find partners, again, in the Republican and Democratic parties, partners willing to come together to help solve this healthcare crisis that we have in this country. And frankly, whoever solves that they're going to be champions. They're going to be heroes. And that's why I think this does have potential appeal to Donald Trump, because Donald Trump always wants to be the winner, as it were. And yeah, he's full of bluster. He says a lot of things rhetorically that, are not going to become reality, but enough of them are to really scare people and raise the anxiety level in our society. But if he can be the populist, because he uses the rhetoric of populism, but it's not the reality of populism, right? His major policy prescription is more tax cuts for the billionaire class. That's really where he starts. And I think it's accurate to say that Elon Musk is co-president-elect. He's in the pictures with Trump, not J.D. Vance, as I think we can all see, that the billionaire class has really captured our politics, and their interest is to make themselves wealthier and to roll back even minimal reforms, minimal regulations that keep our air cleaner and our water cleaner and our soil cleaner and our climate less dangerous, for our inhabitation of this planet. So I guess the bottom line answer is, yes, I see that potential with Donald Trump. Play to his ego, play to his desire to be part of a winner. If the Republicans can be the ones to solve the healthcare crisis in this country, which is I admit it's a long shot, but I think it's one worth taking. And if we solve the healthcare crisis, and this is why I ran for U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania, and out of that I decided to go deep into healthcare, is if we can turn the curve, if we can bend the curve on healthcare, then I think we've got momentum to bend the curve on food quality, on housing, on climate, and all these other issues. Because at the end of the day, I think Trump wants simply to be loved. He wants to be beloved. And so long as we can roll out successes that actually help people, there's no harm in pursuing those objectives. How
do you factor in the Democratic Party's rejection of AOC's bid to become the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee. This has gotten a lot of media attention, I think rightfully so. I think to some degree it was a symbolic fight, but it was but AOC is a symbol of a more populist, more progressive left, a younger left, and she was squashed down. She was squelched by a very significant majority of Democrats, including some from the Progressive Caucus.
Yeah, it does speak volumes as to where we are right now, with the Democratic Party, and I'm going to just repeat what I said earlier. The Democratic Party does not have a strategy. They don't have a strategy to win for themselves, and certainly they don't have a strategy to win for us. And there are certain things that we were able to accomplish in the first 2 years of the Biden administration when the Democrats had all power. And that did help the economy. It lifted children out of poverty, and it helped the overall health situation of the country. We've since backtracked, and now Trump has been elected. I mean, I could get into the weeds as to the problems with his election, but Harris was a completely inadequate candidate for the moment. Being frankly a Californian, she was viewed with great skepticism especially by people in the swing states, and so. The Democratic Party doesn't have a strategy. The Republican Party does have a strategy. And currently that strategy is consolidating all power and not giving that power up. That's the point. I don't count on there necessarily being an election in 2026, let alone 2028. I can see the very real possibility, and now I'm putting on my hat as a German historian, spent decades now, got my PhD in German and American history, is I see the outlines of that transition from the Weimar Republic, if you will, into National Socialism. And that if Trump sees by 2026 that the Republicans are at risk, I could well see him suspending the Constitution, declaring a national emergency, and then marching forward. And because the ideology of fascism is once you use the levers of democracy to get into power, but once you're in power, you have no desire to give that up. And so I think this is the lesson that his hardcore supporters are all about. They don't want to give up power. Having said that, I think what we need to do among progressives is bring forward voices like AOC's, but on the outside. I think this is going to have to happen on the outside. The Democratic Party needs to be scared. They need to be scared into doing the right thing. And I think the same thing is true of the Republicans. But we need to do it in a diplomatic fashion initially. But then we need to pour people into the streets to make sure that they recognize that what they're doing needs to be seen as a positive good, not necessarily one where they're being scared into or feared into doing the right thing. But nonetheless, that's the way I see us going forward, is creating this mass movement. No surprise that AOC was denied that position, just not surprised. The establishment still holds sway within the Democratic Party. It's the Wall Street wing of the Democratic Party, if you will. The squad and the Congressional Progressive Caucus are when you get right down to it, a significant minority within the Democratic Party, but they're still not anywhere near controlling the direction of the party.
Well, and also, Chuck, just let me throw in again what I reiterate: the CPC was not united. They were broke. Right. They're not that progressive. I mean, they use the term, I think it's fair to say, some of them, not all, but some use it just sort of to insulate themselves from attacks that they're too corporate. Absolutely. Oh no, how could I be corporate? I'm part of the CPC. But when push comes to shove, they're going to vote with the PACs. They're going to vote with AIPAC. They're going to vote with Pelosi. And again, I don't want this to be some sort of encomium to AOC. I find her very disappointing. I think it was mostly symbolic, but I think the leadership of the Democratic Party, those with the real power, were like, we're not going to even give you a symbolic victory. That's how I see it. And you talk, just real quick to finish this and then get right back to you, about pressure from the outside. And I think many of us on the left are looking for that kind of a champion, someone who will pressure from the outside, hoping it could be an AOC, hoping it could be a Bernie, but they have decided perhaps they believe it's best strategically, or just they believe for themselves it's best to play along with the Democrats, no matter how badly they're mistreated by the party.
Yeah. And I know I keep coming back to this, but I have to. And that is that they're not even coming from a strategic perspective to win even a social justice agenda, which is to say, yeah, they advocate for these issues. Yeah, they vote for them. Yeah, they have hearings and so forth. But there's no collective thinking about how we create the political power to achieve these goals. There really is not. And I began to have that conversation with Representative Jayapal in Chicago, because she's now the outgoing chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the lead author on expanded and improved Medicare for All national bill, along with Bernie's in the Senate. But I want to reboot that conversation. I was hopeful in that discussion that we were going to talk about strategy, like coordinating and reaching across the aisle, bringing everybody into this thing, being transparent, being bottom up, collecting our politics, collecting our people, building relationships. Being honest with one another, being honest about who we are and our own weaknesses. The Democratic Party, unfortunately, the establishment does not see its ties to Wall Street and Silicon Valley as a weakness. I absolutely do. But they put preeminence on fundraising. And those are the emails that I'm getting in the mail, where they seem to be hinting they're going to talk about strategy, and it turns into a fundraising letter. Like, fundraising is not a strategy. It's not a strategy. It's not what we need at this time, at this critical moment, as we're going into fascism. We've got to be thinking, and unfortunately, I just don't see it. I'm pushing for it, and I encourage your audience, your followers, anybody who's out there willing to listen, is to take a hard look at who you are, look in the mirror, take a radical vision for the future that we actually need in the society, and then begin answering the question, how did we get there in terms of leadership, in terms of communications, in terms, again, of the visioning, in terms of how we create coalitions, use of language, and then short-term, midterm, and long-term victories. Bring ourselves together collectively.
But as you said, I love what you're saying. I agree 100%, not 100%, because I think there is a strategy. I think the Democratic leaders are making a cold-blooded calculation that they'd prefer to guarantee themselves golden parachutes of, the finest, with the finest silk trim, and the beautiful, the houses in Martha's Vineyard and the invitations to Hollywood parties that come with not challenging elites. I think that's the calculation, because you even mentioned fundraising. Look at the difference in fundraising capabilities between these two. AOC raised, I guess, in the last cycle over $10 million, much of which she, by the way, spread around like fertilizer to other Democrats. Connolly raised 1/10 of that, but he takes money from PACs. She doesn't. She does present, I think, somewhat falsely, but nevertheless does present as someone who's at least prepared to take on the system, challenge elites to a degree. And I think that's ultimately where the Hakeem Jeffries and the Chuck Schumers and the Pelosi's and the Obamas, they personally don't want to go there.
Yeah. This is what the Democratic establishment, the leadership of the Democratic Party, if that's a term we want to use, decided after the election of Trump, is just to sit back, be quiet, just sort of what they say, let the Republicans or the MAGA people eat each other. But the fact is that they're complicit in the growth of fascism here, in my view. They're enabling it. They're appeasing. The conscious decision of inaction is, in my view, an action toward appeasing, because fascism only understands power, and the Democrats just don't have the will and the willingness to exercise real power, even for themselves. I hear what you're saying about the top level Democrats looking for a sort of an easy, comfortable post career, comfortable position, maybe as a lobbyist, hanging out with Hollywood types and so forth. I don't quite take that harsh a view. I think a lot of them are just unconscious because they're not aware of what strategy is and why a strategy is necessary. So let's take a very quick formula here, which is to go back to FDR's 4 freedoms. Why don't the Democrats embrace the four freedoms? Why don't we lead with that, right? Which is the two negatives and two positive freedoms. There's the freedom from want, right, which addresses healthcare and food and housing, right? That's one of the four freedoms. The freedom from fear, which is the instability, the uncertainty of one's life. And we can address that again through this justice for all agenda. And then there's also on the positive side of the equation, this is just FDR. We can update it, but I think it's very smart because it plays to both sides of the brain. It's very strategic planning and thinking about how we connect to people. And the Democrats are not doing this. And the positive freedoms are freedom of assembly and speech and worship. And so this is something that I think the Democratic Party really needs to get back to its populist progressive roots back in the 1930s, which did unfortunately have some racist components to it. No question about it. That's probably how we did not get to universal health care during the 1930s under FDR. But the reality is that we can update this and center the Democrats, if you will, and the Republicans on a very central unifying approach to our politics, which is get people fundamentally what they need and keep them from falling into the fear mongering that is feeding the fascism around us.
All right, we're talking to Chuck Pinocchio. So glad to have him on for really brilliant insights on Halitics. By the way, we have some comments in the chat. I do see you guys, Ari and Michael. Thank you for your comments. I have been checking them out. A lot of what you're saying is agreement with Chuck's points, which is great. So I didn't really feel the need to jump in with them. But Ari says, get big money and caps and related out of Congress.
Right.
That's not representing the people. And Michael says, with regard to AOC, she needs to break away from the party. If she doesn't do it now, she never will. And I think that just to jump on top of that point, Chuck, I've been critical of Bernie. I think he's too tight with the Democrats. But because he's an independent, he does have freedom that it seems like no one else does. And a good example of that is doing exactly what you said is strategic. And I agree, going into West Virginia after Biden was, I guess it was after Trump was elected, actually, this has been many years now, and talking to the very poor people there who voted for Trump about their health care needs.
Right.
And he was welcomed. He was applauded. That's strategy, right? That's saying, okay, I want to, well, it's a tactic, but it's a strategy is we're going to be all inclusive. And part of that strategy includes the tactic of we're going to talk to people, we're going to listen to them, and we're going to govern in a way that recognizes their concerns and puts them foremost. The Democrat Party doesn't do that.
By and large, you're correct. And to your point, yeah, it's meeting people where they are and addressing what we call in my work pain points, the issues that really cause them pain, that cause them uncertainty and instability and a fractured life. We've got to get to people and meet people where they are 100%. So that's a strategy-driven tactic. And I agree with you. Absolutely. But, this isn't to me so much about the Democratic Party, Republican Party. It's about the conversation. We're nonpartisan. One pair of states is nonpartisan. We're, again, very agnostic, and we approach this. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like. We see the radical vision of the successful future, the justice future, but then asking the question, how did we get there? We're open to different ideas, short of violence. And that's the conversation I had with Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, who expressed a strong interest in potentially co-leading with Ro Khanna on what is now HR 6270. The bill number will change in the new Congress, but that would be a win. That'd be a huge win. And that, and again, that legislation is actually springs out of the Affordable Care Act. It would be Section 1334. But when we can get that kind of agreement, and recognize in this moment, underscoring the Luigi Mangione moment that we're in. We are in this moment, which has elevated the conversation about what our healthcare system is, not necessarily the sort of cultish hero worship, if you will, but rather take advantage of the fact that people are now focused once again on this predatory industry, and ask people to join the effort. And the theory of change that we have is the chances of getting to a national solution through the states is the best pathway forward, because it's the path of least resistance. Washington, D.C. is just cluttered, as you know, with massive amounts of money and lobbyists and so forth. But we can do this, we can model this through certain progressive states like Oregon, Washington, Minnesota, Maine, New York, elsewhere, and make this model demonstrate exactly how much the country would save in terms of money, but also would save in terms of quality of life and keeping people out of medical bankruptcy. It's win-win-win for people, and it's loss for the CEOs at the top of these corporations.
Oh, that's too bad. I'm shedding a tear right now. I don't know if you can see it for those CEOs. I feel really bad for them. Chuck, I may have misunderstood this, but I was, again, focused. I tried to really understand your discussion on PDA, which was actually very clear. When I say PDA, Progressive Democrats of America, you can find that video on YouTube. Chuck spoke to them. Was it Monday? I think it was Monday, or at least the video was posted. Maybe it was Sunday. I didn't watch it while it happened. I didn't participate then. Here's the question. Did you talk about your experiences pushing for single payer in your home state, one of your home states, Pennsylvania, including working across the aisle? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And I did that work for 5 years until the full name, right? Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. First off, that's terrible branding. And that's typical of what the Democrats do. They try to go wonky. They go wonky with their words, right? Like patient protection. Why don't you just call it American security or American healthcare security for all? It's something that's simple and people can understand. But that's actually part of the equation, and why we were successful in Pennsylvania, which is a nominally conservative state. And I trekked my way out to Harrisburg a couple times a week on average, and banged on the door of the gatekeeper on healthcare. Back in the day, it was Don White, who resided in Indiana County, the very opposite side of the state. He was the chair of the Senate Insurance and Banking Committee. Now you say insurance and bank. Yeah, that's where the Republicans traditionally assign healthcare, to insurance. That should tell you a lot right there. But the choice of our name, the organization, we call ourselves One Payer. Why do we say one payer? Because it's the same thing as single payer, but it doesn't scare people. I mean, honestly, why is it that we do not use language that is going to encourage the conversation, it's going to promote the conversation? So it's the conversation, it's the willingness to show up. It's the willingness not to take no, because every lobbyist in Harrisburg told me, you'll never get a meeting with Don White, let alone a hearing. You tell me that, and I'm going to figure out a way to make it happen. And we did. I traveled across the state, met him face to face. He really appreciated the fact that it took 5 hours to drive west. And of course, it would be 5 hours driving back home for simply a 30-minute meeting that he wouldn't have in Harrisburg. His staff would not permit him to take a meeting with me in Harrisburg. So that left only one choice, and that was to drive to his district across the state.
And you, at least as when I knew you in Pennsylvania, were even further east than Harrisburg. So you had a longer drive.
Oh, yeah.
Than from Harrisburg to Indiana County, which is, I guess, west of Pittsburgh, northwest of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I mean, think of the Delaware River. That's where I lived. I lived right on the edge of the Delaware River, Bucks County, just north of Philadelphia. So, yeah, it was a haul. And what's interesting is that Don White, he really, I think, was moved by the fact that we, as a movement, were so determined to get a fair hearing for our universal healthcare legislation, that we were willing to do what we did. And what's interesting too is that after a half hour, the half-hour meeting, which his chief of staff was present, and he was just sort of trying to run out the clock, honestly. But after half an hour, Don White turned to his chief of staff and said, I tell you what, you take the next meeting. I'm going to stay here and talk to Chuck further. And so Don gave me a one-on-one 45-minute extension of what was a 30-minute meeting. And in that 45 minutes, he told me his healthcare story. He actually had the desire.
So did this lead to some tangible either legislation or some change? Because I guess that's the next question.
What it did is it gave us the very first, and so far only Republican chaired, this is a standing committee hearing, Republican chaired standing committee hearing on single payer. And we crushed it. We crushed the hearing. And Don White knew it. The industry came up and they gave their presentations, but they lied about our bill. They misrepresented the bill. And even Republicans on the committee pushed back at them and they say, how dare you come before our committee as unprepared as you are? So they walked away with their tails between their legs. But, and this is the but, they did rally, which is to say that Don White, during the latter part of the hearing, I was in the back of the room. He came to me, he took a bathroom break, came over to me and he said, you guys were really well prepared today. You did a wonderful job. I'd like to take these hearings on the road. He wanted to continue the process. This is a very conservative Republican who comes out of the insurance industry, but who wanted to have the conversation because his daughter was an internist at Christiana Hospital in Wilmington, Delaware. He wanted his daughter and his grandchildren to come back home. That's his healthcare story. So he was motivated to actually do this just to explore that possibility. But between the hearing that we had, I think, which was on December 10th, this is now 2009, and shortly after the 1st of January 2010, the insurance industry, Don White's friends got to him. And they said, you know, the one hearing's enough. That's it. We don't want any more hearings. Now, I'm not in the room to say that that's explicitly what they said, but that's clearly what the message was, because I had a standing meeting with Don White and his chief of staff shortly after the 1st of the new year. And I went into the office and his chief of staff was there, but Don White was not. And I knew within a couple minutes that this was going nowhere because he was looking at his watch. We were being interrupted by the receptionist. And basically he called an end to the meeting, and that was the end of the discussion. There would be no more hearings.
It's so heartbreaking. It's so wrong. You know, even when you see politicians and you believe, and I think probably in this case it was true that his heart was at least at one point in the right place. It wasn't firmly enough in that place to buck
right.
All the money and all the power that, courses through even state capitals. In light of that ultimately unsatisfying story, though, that does give us some, certainly insights into how to move forward. Do you see any states, and I know the big kahuna, California, the big enchilada, California, New York, are a couple, maybe Oregon, maybe Washington State, where there's chances. Where do you see the best likelihood now for getting a single payer or a one payer state? Which is our most likely one payer state in the next few years?
Yeah, so far, I would say Oregon is leading the charge. They're closest. They're in the process of designing a bill and doing the necessary economic studies to figure out how to pay for it. Washington State is a step behind Oregon. And I would put also Minnesota, New York, and California in that same camp, if you will, sort of a step or so behind Oregon. And then there are a cluster of other states, including Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Michigan, Colorado, that are in the process of either introducing new single-payer legislation or reviving a bill that previously had failed to pass in the previous Congress. So I would say there are about 10 states that are really primed for the fight, but I would put Oregon at the top of the. The
experience in Maryland has been very disappointing. We have a state delegate, actually a friend of mine, Sheila Ruth, who introduced Healthy Maryland, which includes a directive not to actually implement single payer, but to have a task force commission to investigate how it can be done, how it should be done, and then to put forward a plan to implement it. And we're a trifecta state. And the healthcare industry, nevertheless, has just stymied it. They kill it in committee every single time, Chuck. Right. And I hope, I don't know, but I'm hopeful that maybe in Oregon or Washington State, there's a little more independent-minded Democrats there.
Yeah. Maryland was one of the original partners in the One Pair of States consortium, the group that onepairofstates.org. It was Pennsylvania, Maryland, and California. Actually, we were all very interested in doing an economic study on our single payer legislation. Back then, it was State Senator Karen Montgomery in Maryland was running the bill, and we had Jim Furlow and Kathy Mandarino carried the House bill in Pennsylvania, and Sheila Kuehl was the champion out in California at that time. And I was convinced that in order for this to pass, we needed to get serious about the economics of healthcare. And that's the only way that you're going to win over the center and the right of center, is to make that economic argument that this is going to liberate the economy. It's going to allow the entrepreneurial class to flourish. People are tied to their jobs because of healthcare, right? Because of health insurance. They don't dare step away from their jobs. And yet, so what that means is that they're not as productive in the workplace. They're not as happy. They're not as creative. By getting a universal healthcare system, that would unleash immense creativity and energy in our society, in our economy. And I wish people would see that. And that's really what's on us. But these study bills that you referred to, they keep recycling again and again. It's really a way to just sort of run out the clock, right? It's like, we know what this does. We know what single payer can accomplish. Why do we have to study it again and again and again and again? Every study where you put single payer up against any other competitive idea, let's say the public option, or Republicans want to allow people to buy insurance across state lines, what have you, single payer wins every single time. And yet we have to study it again. It's absurd.
Well, just to defend Sheila's bill, the study also included a mandate, which was, once you've concluded, assuming you conclude this will be cost effective, cost efficient, and lead to better results, then you are tasked, part 2, to develop a plan to implement it, and then to implement it.
Absolutely. And shame on him. Gavin Newsom ran on single payer, as you probably know, the governor of California. And once he got into power, he turned his back on that pledge, and that he actually led with that issue.
I did not. I thought he had always been pretty clear that he wasn't going to support it.
Nope. He paid a lot of rhetorical attention to it during his campaign for governor. And, this is the betrayal that you talk about, and I totally get it. And for people who are frustrated with the Democratic Party, I totally get it. I get it more, I think, than most people do. And my tolerance level is, has its limitations as well. But I can only deal with what I've got available to me in terms of the levers of power. And the Democratic Party needs to be woken up. The Republican Party needs to be woken up. They need to be divorced from this money. I think candidates should be primaried if they don't take a position in support of overturning Citizens United. I think that actually should be a litmus test for any candidate running for office, because anybody who doesn't support overturning Citizens United, which, as you know, gives all power to corporations and billionaires to control and buy our politics. If you're not down with that idea of overturning Citizens United, I don't think you have any business being a public servant.
Well, let me just circle back then. We'll close with this discussion, although I'll always give you the final word to talk about one-payer states. But isn't what you're saying ultimately a very strong argument for progressives to rally behind a Green Party, a party that explicitly doesn't take corporate contributions, that isn't, you can't take PAC money? Because even if you could make the argument, and I think, I hate to say it, but one could have made the argument correctly, Jill Stein wasn't going to win no matter how many progressives, no matter how many progressive Democrats of America, no matter how many Our Revolution supporters. It didn't matter. She probably wasn't going to win. She wasn't going to win. But if she got a large percentage of votes, and it was clear that without that cohort, the Democrats could not win, wouldn't that force them either to move to the left or ultimately set the stage for their being supplanted, much as we saw the Republicans take the place of the Whig Party in the 1850s when the Democrats strike that, when the Whigs could not become a pro-freedom, anti-slavery party?
Yeah. I don't. I fully support my friends who want to push in the direction of a third party movement. Absolutely. I think the competition's good. I think that there are a number of reasons why the election came out the way that it did. The trend lines globally were such, and this isn't to make excuses for Harris, who ran a California style campaign until the end, when she made Liz Cheney and Mark Cuban the face of her campaign, and they threw disproportionate amounts of resources into trying to win over women in the white women in the suburbs. That totally backfired. Why didn't they go after young people? Why didn't they adopt a message that was hardcore addressed to working class? Never did the word working class, as far as I know, cross her lips. It was always middle class, not working class, middle class. And I think that's a real disconnect. The fact that she didn't run hard on a living wage, it was a mistake. She was running center right. She abandoned her previous position, whether you believed it or not, whether it was sincere or not, on Medicare for all. She flipped on fracking, and she didn't take any decisive position to stop this genocide that you refer to at the top, in the Middle East. So she did not inspire the confidence that would be necessary for younger people to vote. And first-time voters went with Trump, I think 55-44. First-time voters with Trump, 55-44. But having said that, Trump actually came in under 50% total vote. So I'm trying to put this in proportion. I'm trying to keep this the reality here. I think the Republican Party is broken. I think the Democratic Party is broken. The Republican Party, though, has been able to convince, or I would even say, well, what's the short version of convince is con people into believing that they're on the side of the working class. I don't think that our country, or the political system is rigged against creating a third party. And until something dramatic, even more dramatic than where we are right now, I just don't see a viable third party rising up. And so I continue to work as best I can across the aisle, because I think the best way to get the attention of Democrats, especially the establishment, is to make success with Republicans. And yet I don't know any or many other social justice organization leaders that are actually reaching out to the Republicans. They're so dependent on the Democrats. We're not.
I just have to jump in because I agree with you. I am so angry at groups that I actually worked with because they are playing right into that demonize the voters. Right. Demonize the other side and play and present their supporters as somehow more admirable, more patriotic, more pro-America, and it's so counterproductive. Putting everything outside, I mean, I believe it's wrong, but it's also counterproductive. But I think they do it because that's how they can raise money, and it's very, very upsetting. I want to give you the final word. You had a great, that was a closing, right, what you just presented, but do you have a final thought on how people can help the movement for one payer?
Yeah, I mean, please check out onepayerstates.org. Give us feedback at info@onepayerstates.org. Get involved. We have work groups that center on communications, outreach, education, advocacy. How
do we get involved in those work groups? Because I'm interested in doing that myself, and I didn't. Is it right there at the website, or do you have a easy way to do that?
Yeah, just write directly to info@PD America and indicate. The work groups are listed on the website.
Is it PD America or One Payer States? I'm sorry, you said.
No. Yeah, it's PD. I'm sorry. What am I thinking? It's onepayerstates.org.
So info@onepayerstates.org.
Right. Info@onepayerstates.org. All one word, .org. And one, yeah. Payer.
I'll put that in the show description after we're done. Chuck, I want to wish you a great holiday season. I don't know what holidays, if any, you celebrate. My assumption is, as someone who I believe is Italian American, maybe you're Catholic, maybe you don't celebrate, maybe you're lapsed, maybe you're not. I don't know. So I won't even wish you Merry Christmas, but I wish you very, very happy holidays.
Yeah, I celebrate them all, Hal. I really do.
Well, then happy Hanukkah too.
And Kwanzaa, and winter
Kwanzaa,
solstice.
Chinese New Year.
Right, 100%. Yeah,
All right.
that's the relationship building. Frankly, that's the intentional connecting ourselves across cultural lines. That's part of our strategy as well. Love to you and your family. Wishing you and your audience many happy returns. 2025 is going to be a challenging year, but let's pull ourselves together and be creative in how we connect and how we build relationships and how we build political power. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Chuck. I'll be back tomorrow. That's Chuck. We'll get him back in the new year for sure. And I'll be, tomorrow and then Monday.